Begin. So this recording is happening on Friday, March 18th, and it's going to be released on March 21st on the Stoa's birthday. It's second birthday, and I'm with my friend Dajleet Peterson, the resident astrologer at the Stoa, and the man who helped me take the astrology pill. Astrology was something that, I came from more of a skeptic tradition. And then I took this, when was it? In December, I think, when we had our session, a personal astrology session. And I was just like blown away how you conducted the session, and then the resonance that happened with some of the stuff that you told me. It's like some of the stuff was corresponding to some relationship stuff that you were telling me, and the chart was corresponding to the stuff that was happening. So I'm like, I still don't know what to make of astrology, but there's something the way you do it that I quite like, and there's something that there. And you suggested that, or you just randomly asked me, I think, like, when was the Stoa born? And then you wanted to do a chart on the Stoa, and I'm like, yeah, fucking A, let's do it, and let's do it on near the Stoa's birthday. And then you agreed, and so we're here. So that's the framing for people watching on YouTube right now. And then you're going to take me and then the people watching through the birthday chart of the Stoa, and then we're just going to riff. Does that sound about right for the framing?
That sounds perfect. And yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here on an auspicious occasion to celebrate the Stoa's second birthday. And, I've been studying astrology for over 20 years now, and sometimes I still don't know what to make of astrology. So it's a very mysterious sort of subject and topic. It's fascinating. It's one that has captured my imagination for the better part of 20 years. So yeah, I don't know what it is that resonates, but there's something there, as they say. So yeah, so I thought it would be fun to jump in and do a chart for the Stoa, because, just like the birth of a person, the birth of an entity, the birth of a nation, the birth of a company or corporation, anything that is born at any particular time, as Carl Jung says, has the quality of that time. So when we cast a chart for a person or for a YouTube channel, even though I know the Stoa is not a fucking YouTube channel, maybe we'll find that personality in the chart of the Stoa itself. That's a very rebellious type of stance to take. The Stoa is an Aries sun, so maybe that's why it has that sort of impulsive, rebellious nature to it, that Mars energy. It's very masculine, very yang, very fuck off kind of attitude. So that could be something that resonates with the Stoa. So yeah, I thought we would just sort of pull up the chart, do what we normally do when I do sessions like we did for your personal chart. We'll take a look at a couple of things. Basically, I want to look at the chart of the Stoa, its birth chart, because as I said, when it's born, that quality of the time it was born into is part of the character of the Stoa. And I was, I read in one of your recent blog posts, you had said how, the Stoa was a child of Corona, I think. And that's absolutely true. And when we look at the chart of the Stoa, we see this constellation that as astrologers, we had been looking at for years with some trepidation about, because it's a particular constellation of planets that always tends to indicate very difficult, challenging times. So this massive stellium, as we call it, in Capricorn with Pluto and Saturn, those two planets particular. And then we also had Jupiter and Mars. And so this is a very rare occasion of all this energy in one part of the sky. And the archetypal significance of that is usually very difficult, heavy, and sort of challenging times. I thought maybe it would just, if you indulge me, I was going to read a quote from Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche, which is a book anyone new to astrology or curious about it, especially from, I think, the Stoa community, where, like yourself, might be skeptical about it. This is a really good entree into the subject. Richard Tarnas is a renowned scholar. He actually began studying with Stan Grof, who did all the LSD research back in the early 70s. And they were trying to figure out why everyone's LSD trips had different themes to them. And they stumbled on doing the charts of the people who were in these studies that they were doing. And Tarnas discovered these patterns with their astrological transits tended to align with the archetypal content of their LSD trips, which he did not expect. They expected it to be bogus, and they found an incredible alignment with it. So that began his journey with astrology. And it really kind of culminates in this book that he wrote. I think it was in 2004. But he talks about this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And I thought I would read this one paragraph. This is before coronavirus. But here's what he has to say about this cycle. This is, the successive quadrature alignments of the Saturn-Pluto cycle coincided with especially challenging historical periods marked by a pervasive quality of intense contraction, eras of international crisis and conflict, empowerment of reactionary forces and totalitarian impulses, organized violence and oppression, all sometimes marked by lasting traumatic effects. An atmosphere of gravity and tension tends to accompany this 3 to 4 year period, as did widespread epochal closure, the end of an era, the end of innocence, the destruction of an earlier mode of life that in retrospect may seem to have been marked by widespread indulgence, decadence, naivete, denial, and inflation.
Wow.
Does that sound,
That nails it.
oddly, yeah, oddly
Mm.
prescient, right? About what, and that was looking at the historical cycle. It's about a 33-year cycle. The last time those two planets were conjunct was actually like 83, 84, which aligned with the outbreak of the AIDS epidemic. So it is associated with disease and pandemics. And a lot of astrologers did predict and got it right that we may see a global pandemic with this, this alignment. But it's always character, Saturn and Pluto, they combined for this energy of very difficult, intense, challenging, limiting, loss, suffering. It's a very difficult period that those two archetypes tend to constellate. And, the historical cycles bear it out. It was conjunct during the Black Plague in Europe. So anyway, that's the sort of background into which the Stoa was born. So if we pull up the chart, we'll see Saturn and Pluto, along with Jupiter, along with Mars. That happens, maybe it's been hundreds of years since that kind of configuration has happened. So pretty special time astrologically. And so that's also the most significant, I think, indication in the chart of the Stoa itself. So, yeah, so should we dig into the chart? Do you have any questions before we open it up, or?
No questions. I'm just super stoked and excited. Like, this is the first time I've seen it, or going to be seeing it. So yeah, I'm just giddy with excitement.
Cool. So let me just share my screen. We'll pop up the chart here. So there she is. So what I was just talking about is this, what we would call a stellium. So for those who are not as familiar with astrology, what we're looking at here is a snapshot of the sky, what the planets looked like when the Stoa was born. And, we've agreed that it was March 21st, 2020 at 10 a.m. in Toronto. And you did a session with, I believe it was with Jordan Hall, right? The situational assessment, which really did set the tone for what has become the Stoa, right? This was the format. This was the initiation of this community and this endeavor. And so this is a snapshot of the quality of the time at which the Stoa was born. And so I'm here in this part of the sky, which is Capricorn. You can see it, and just looking at it, you can kind of tell there's something big going on over here. You've got, this is all the symbols of the planets across these different houses, which represent different aspects of the self or the identity of the character of the entity being discussed. But this was the big deal. This is what we as astrologers were looking forward to and going, wow, this is a massive event. This does not happen very often. This is going to be intense because anytime you have planets conjuncting Pluto, they're intense. Pluto is known as the Lord of intensity. It wants to transform everything it touches. And it can be very disruptive. It's a very underground, unconscious, libidinal energy. It's dangerous. It's volcanic. It's eruptive. It's associated with the sign Scorpio and that sort of sexual intensity. Knowing you as a double Scorpio yourself, I'm sure you know all about Pluto's energy. It's one of your, I think it is probably the archetype of your daimon. So just a little aside on that. So it's interesting that Pluto figures prominently in the chart of the Stoa, and that the steward of the Stoa is a highly Plutonic dude, astrologically speaking. So, but that adds a certain intensity, right? And then you add Saturn into the mix, and this is the thing. It's a 33-year cycle. Every 33 years, Saturn comes around to the same part of the sky as Pluto is. And Saturn's just the great taskmaster. It's all about limits and restrictions. It's about rules and regulations, the rules of society. It's associated with the sign Capricorn. So all things hierarchical, right? Authority, systems of law and order. So when you get Saturn and Pluto together in Capricorn, which is the sign of hierarchy, of the patriarchy, of the structure of society, what you can expect is archetypally is this theme of a transformation of the structure of society. And the way Pluto works, it can work one of two ways. It can either, if energy is worked with and the need to transform that area is recognized, it can be done, it's an evolutionary process. But if that is resisted, then it becomes a cataclysmic process. It can be very destructive. Interestingly, Pluto entered Capricorn exactly coincident with the financial crisis of 2008, which was really the first challenge to the global system, right? We have built this interrelated, interconnected global system, and it almost collapsed the entire world, right? We were on the brink of every system just failing and tumbling. It would have been catastrophic. And so that's the tone of this whole era we're in. We're in this Pluto and Capricorn era that's going to end in 2024. So we're almost through it. And so this is a very trying period for all of society. We're going through a massive social structural change. That's what the archetype of Capricorn and of Pluto in Capricorn represents. But when it comes with Saturn, it's all about restrictions, contractions, and what happened during the coronavirus, right? Like government stepped in, right? Huge, massive shutdowns, like they shut down the world, the Western world, and really the entire planet got shut down by this global crisis. So those two planets signify that. And then you add Mars, which is the planet of aggression, and Jupiter, the planet of expansion of global proportions. You can see why you could look at this constellation of archetypes and go, wow, this is going to be a big deal that's going to impact the entire world. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. There is going to be loss. There is going to be suffering. It is going to be a trial, a tribulation. And that's exactly what it has turned out to be. Now, the Stoa being born in March of 2020, when it really, the proverbial shit hit the fan, I know here in North America, even though it had unfolded earlier in Asia and parts of Europe, that is really when I think we all it all got real fucking real, right? For me, I know it was March. We got sent home and office shut down. It was like, okay, you couldn't get a roll of toilet paper anywhere. So it was pretty intense. So we can see that as being part of, this is why the Stoa is a child of the coronavirus, and that this is a key characteristic of the character of the Stoa. Now, when we consider where it falls for the Stoa, it's interesting. It's in this 8th house, and this is the house of intense transformational types of experiences. We call it the house of agony and ecstasy. It's the house of sex, death, and regeneration. It's the house of, rites of passage. It's the house of rituals. It's the house of the hidden, the secret, the taboo, right? Anything occult is associated with the 8th house. Things done secretly, or secret societies or groups working in nefarious ways, or, just working towards very spiritual practices, Kundalini energy, things of that nature. Very intense. So again, not surprising that the Stoa has that quality, right? There's something very you would expect of this entity to be very intense. It's conditioned to have very deep transformational experiences, especially involving relationships, intense interpersonal dynamics. It's set up for those kinds of transitions, right? And if you think about the intent, I think, of the Stoa is to meet the challenges of the meaning crisis and the meta crisis. These were the things that you were tracking in the culture. And for you, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's part of the impetus for choosing to steer steward the Stoa, if you will, right?
Yeah, those definitely attractors, being aware of the meaning crisis and meta crisis. I wouldn't say it's maybe not the reason why. I wouldn't phrase it like that, but yeah, it's definitely embedded in the spiritual DNA of this place and the culture war too.
So yeah, it's very much has all of those, and having all of those planets and that energy in that one sector of the chart says, that's part of the identity of this entity that is our beloved Stoa. Now, I'll just talk about some of the other salient features so we can kind of orient ourselves to what the Stoa is, because when you look at when we do a chart for a person, right, we're looking at the personalities. There's three factors that really emerge as being of primary importance. It's the sun, the moon, and the rising, right? Those three things, we call them the big three in astrology. They really can give us really the essential character of a person, a place, a thing. And in the Stoa's case, we have, it was born the day after the spring equinox, right? March 20th is always the first day of spring. So it was born on the second day of spring. So here we have the sun moving into the sign of Aries, right? And you could not have a better time to initiate something new, right? The spring, this is why our ancestors celebrated the equinoxes and were as particularly important, right? The spring equinox was about initiation. It's the initiation of a new solar year. You're ending the old year, winter ends, spring begins, and it has this energy of it's a fire sign, it's a cardinal sign, it's a yang sign, it's very masculine, it's very action oriented. It's associated with spring fever, right? It's like you're just ready to go. Spring comes around and we're just motivated to start new projects, to initiate new things. So the Stoa has that quality of being very Aries, and it has a Mars quality to it. So we associate it's freedom loving, it's independent loving, it can be rambunctious. It's almost like I always think of like an 8-year-old boy, right? Very headstrong and wants to just go and do. And it doesn't really even think about it. It kind of discovers itself through action. It's not very premeditated and it's not very self-conscious. It has this sort of almost natural quality to it. But it can also be a little naive, right? It can be challenging. It can be tactless at times. It can be difficult, that Aries energy. So the Stoa has that quality. Interesting too, that it's in the 11th house in this chart, which is the chart of community. The 11th house is about our social orientation, the groups that we associate with, the gifts that we bring to society. So very interesting that the identity of the Stoa is to initiate something new, Aries, within a community, 11th house. Very appropriate for what the Stoa is. Now, it's also conjunct Chiron in this chart. Chiron is like a real tricky archetype. It's what's known as the wounded healer, right? It usually indicates a place, an area in the chart where there is a wound, a trauma that needs to be healed. And so with this, it's like the sun is shining a light on the trauma, the wounding, whether it's the cultural wounds or the dealing with the meta crisis, the existential crisis that maybe the Stoa sees in the community that needs healing, right? And Chiron can have this almost shamanic quality to it, right? It can be a healer. It can tap the wisdom, this natural wisdom of knowing what it's like to have the trauma and then finding the path to healing. So I think that's an interesting sort of quality that the Stoa tends to embody. Now, in contrast to the sun, the other big symbol is the moon in any chart. And here, the Stoa has a Pisces moon. So you couldn't get much more contrast between Aries and Pisces. They're like, it's the end and the beginning. They're crosses of a threshold. So here you have this brand new, bold, audacious, young kind of sun with this very old, wise, compassionate moon, right? Moon in Aries, conjunct Mercury, right? So it gives the Stoa's message has this uh, compassion. There's a caring. There's a this sort of love, right? The agape nature, right? Pisces is all about the unconditional. It's about the the transcendental. It's the mythopoetic, right? So this gives I think the Stoa has that quality. I think of engaging in those mythopoetic dimensions. And it's in its 10th house, which is its most public facing house. So this is another character, another side of the Stoa, and I think it shows the vast diversity that if you look at, God, how many episodes have you done? I don't know if you even count them at this point, but if you, I mean, it takes you a good 2 minutes to scroll them all. I've done it on YouTube, and it's like I'm always blown away by just the vast diversity of voices and topics, and it's like, and like that's very Aries. It's like it's not afraid to go in any direction, right? And it has this, all over the place, but it's like there's something bigger it's gathering. There's an emotional intelligence to it. I always associate Moon and Pisces. People have a high emotional intelligence who have Moon and Pisces. So, and this desire to express and communicate that through its Mercury. And then communication is the other factor when we think about the Stoa has a Gemini rising, right? So the rising sign is sort of the public face of any person, place, or thing. The chart is showing us this is what it's oriented to. So when people see this Stoa for the first time, what they see is this Gemini aspect, which I think is quite appropriate. Because what is Gemini all about? It's about the exchange of information. It's about communication. It's about dialoguing. It just loves to talk, right? And what is the Stoa, right? It's this giant chat session where we have a lot of really interesting, provocative dialogues. It's a very Gemini quality to have. So those are like some of the most salient features. And something else that I think is interesting about this chart is we can see that all of the planets are above the horizon over here in this second hemisphere, right? Nothing really significant going on below. And when we consider the entire zodiac, the lower hemisphere is called I call it the me hemisphere. It's focused on sort of personal things, whereas the second hemisphere is the we hemisphere. It focuses on the world, relationships, right? So again, it's super interesting that the Stoa is a very publicly facing entity. You didn't set this up to have private conversations with your friends or to do something for your own personal gain. It seems that it's very oriented towards eighth house issues, particular, right? All this transformational energy. It's oriented towards the ninth house, which is philosophy, right? Which is spirituality, which is a connection to the global, to the foreign ideas. It's got the big picture in mind. It has a lot of planets in the 10th house, which is very public. It's about the reputation. It's about fame, about what you're known for. It's got its sun in the 11th house, which is community. And then it's got, Uranus and Venus over here in Taurus in the 12th house, which is about really the transcendental, the mythopoetic, the touching the world beyond. So it's just a really interesting snapshot here of the personality of the Stoa and the energy into which this entity was born. So this was what the world looked like in March 2020. So this was the configuration in the sky. So we could look at it in terms of, it affected us all. If you were to look at our own charts, we would see these planets aligning up in different parts of our own charts. And so, which is why the events will all affect each of us differently, right? So, I know for me, all of this was taking place in my personal second house. I was really feeling this really challenge to my value system. It really changed my attitude about what was really valuable in my life. I had just a aha moment almost exactly to this week that this occurred, that the Stoa was born. And I began seeking the others. Find the others was one of my the mantras that came up for me. And I think that's how I found the Stoa. So it's all connected in this very beautiful cosmic dance that we're all doing together. And I guess, astrology is this system, it's a language that's trying to help us understand the quality of the time that we live in, right? So yeah, that's one way of looking at it. I'm curious to what your thoughts are on any of that we just went over there.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. And I'll share what resonated. Um, and just high level, like reflecting on the like sort of like the Stoa is my baby, right? So just kind of reflecting on like people sharing some thoughts on the Stoa, especially in this sort of way. It's quite cool. And like the things that resonated, the Sun and Aries, and so yeah, that kind of just go attitude. It's almost precognitive. Just this is like the word like thumos comes up for me, just like, and there's like a method to the go rhythm, but it's just like I don't really think when I steward this place when it's like it's just like do go. So that kind of cool. I didn't think of it as Aries before, because I didn't know what it felt on the Sun, but yeah, that feels resonates. And the Moon in Pisces, there is this quality, a through line of the Stoa is that this really embodied and emotional aspect that you might not get when you just watch a few like Galaxy Brain sessions. But when you actually go to some of the sessions, the Wisdom Gym, or just be there in the session, then you'll definitely feel that. And that's cool with the rising with Gemini. And my superficial understanding of like Gemini before I started looking into astrology more with you was, there's just the communication, a little superficial, like novelty, you talk about all these different type of things into like kind of a philosophical discourse. So that's cool. Like on the rising to the surface, like the public, like almost persona of something. Yeah, that's cool. Because if you take a glimpse of the Stoa, it's just a bunch of talking heads, right? And it is like Zoom is like, talking heads, little boxes. And then the diversity is just, I always say it's probably one of the most mimetically diverse places on the internet. And we've have like probably 600 recorded sessions, but well over 1,000 sessions since this place started 2 years ago now. So yeah, those are the things that resonated. And I'm curious, my question for you is like, as someone who's a professional astrologer, and then the Stoa quite well, I think you've discovered almost a year now. And what kind of like stood out for you when you were doing the chart? Like, was that something a surprise, or like, oh, that's obvious?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, obviously the big thing that always attracts me when I ever just look at a chart, it's like what draws my eye. And of course, it's this 8th house stellium. It's like, okay, that's connected to this transformation that's taking place within society. And that's really what, tuned me into the Stoa as this whole thing was unfolding. And I started looking around for other people who were trying to make sense of this unfoldment. It was, Rebel Wisdom and the Stoa were the two sort of entities that sort of just popped on my radar as for what I was looking for. And it was just like, and it kind of nailed it. It was like, okay, this is exactly the kind of community and information and discourse that I was looking for. So that for me is super significant and will always be. And I think as I penetrated deeper, coming from, okay, Gemini, here's this information that they're sharing. Like I was hungry for that knowledge, but it wasn't until I participated in the live player course, right? I actually did something when we really were doing an embodied practicum, where we were putting some of this stuff to actual real world practice, that I really got it. And I really got to know you through that process too. And that to me is the 8th house, right? It's like, it's the deep interpersonal relating. It's the rituals. It's the process. It's getting into the muck and the mire of it and being willing to have those experiences that can be transformational. And I think, I think a lot of people would agree with me, like people, particularly who have participated in some of the, the wisdom gyms and the other things that you guys have done. that are really the heart and soul, I think, of the community. That's the real juice of the Stoa for me. And so it's like, sure, you can kind of come in from the perspective of, oh, here's a lot of information and oh, it's interesting and it's all over the place. But when you get deep in, and you have to get deep in, the eighth house is the part we let people, it's very vulnerable, right? There's something very raw about, I don't, for me, like that live player course was amazing. And it really shifted my perspective about what I should be doing, how I should be showing up. And it really, I have a desire to participate more. I was like, yes, I want to be part of this. This is the community that I think it's the heart of what this is evolving towards, right? We're talking about year 2. And, it's interesting with Aries, like at this time of year, every year, you're going to be like, it's going to be this sort of crisis as you move from Pisces to Aries. Like, do I still want to do this? Is this something? I know at the first birthday, it was like, oh, you were thinking about just shutting it down, right? You'll always want to sort of reinvent it this time every year. You'll get this impulse to just Aries, right? Do something new or bold or different or change it, right? And so that's actually very healthy for the Stoa, that annually it will sort of do this situational assessment of the Stoa, right? The thing that was born under, and say, well, what are we doing? How are we orienting? And to that design, we can actually look at, what's in store for the Stoa for this year. And we do something called the solar return chart for that. And so essentially what that does is it says, okay, here we are, well, this will be airing on March 21st of this year. And so we say, well, where is that Aries sun going to be this year? At that one, what's the quality of that time? How has it changed? Right. And then we cast a chart for that year. So it's really helpful maybe for you to say, okay, what should the Stoa look at? What might be some of the things that are going to come up for the Stoa during 2022, during this third cycle of the Stoa? And here we see a much different configuration, right? That Aries sun is still over here, but it's in the 7th house, right? Still, Chiron's moved away, but it's still there. So a lot of emphasis on relationships, right? Building relationships within this community, fostering relationships, fostering more dialogue between yourself and your guests, maybe between members of the community. An emphasis on relationship is key for this year for the Stoa. It has a Libra rising for the year. So rather than that Gemini, it's starting to, again, the sign of relationships, the sign of equitable dialogue, the sign of fairness and equity and justice, of a more balanced relationship between the sexes. Maybe bringing in, it's ruled by Venus, I can see maybe more feminine energy coming into the Stoa for this year, or harmonizing of those two. We see this incredible stellium here in the 5th house, the house of fun and creativity, the house of play, right? This is a big deal, I think. 5th house Aquarius, how can the Stoa find ways of creating cutting edge, futuristic, we think of Aries, it's very innovative, ways of showing up in fun and creativity and self-expression. You've got Mars and Venus conjunct here in your 5th house. Like, that's fun, that's joy, that's pleasure. It symbolizes the eros or the erotic, right? I was thinking, I looked at this, I thought about your friend Zach Stein, right? And he has that notion of cosmo-erotic humanism, which I love. And I think this has some of that quality to it. Now it's got Saturn there too, so it's got to be disciplined. It's got to be practical. How do we take some of these ecologies and practices and make them fun, 5th house, but make them useful, make them practical? Saturn will demand that we find ways of implementing these things in very practical, structured ways. A lot of 6th house emphasis. And we talked about, right before we jumped on the call, you talked about routine versus ritual in one of the sessions that you recently did, right? Well, routine is another big feature of the Stoa this year. Here we have Jupiter, Mercury, and Neptune all in Pisces, in the 6th house of routines, of habits, of healthy habits, taking better care of ourselves. How do we do better on a day-to-day basis? What can we do to instigate practices that are healthy habit forming, right? and here in Pisces that are spiritually oriented, that are transcendental, that are mythopoetic, that are artistic and expressive and creative, right? I think about all that that dialogue about between Plan B and the Dark Renaissance, and how do we get more artistic, right? How do we involve that mythopoetic? I think those kind of subjects will be pertinent for the Stoa this year. Very practical, and maybe it's the wisdom gem stuff, like real, like nuts and bolts. This is how you actually can structure life. How do we implement these ecologies of practice that we talk so much about? How do we really embody them and in practice? And then you've got Uranus in the 8th house of transformation. So there's a rebellious renegade type energy to Uranus. It's disruptive. It's inventive. It's really genius in a way. So in this whole period of Uranus and Taurus, again, it gets to the embodiment, and this gets to the ritual aspect. The 8th house is all about ritual. And as we saw with the birth chart, with all those planets were in the 8th house, it's very part of the Stoa's identity. Here, there's something this year that calls you to something new, something sudden may come into the energy of the Stoa that really mixes things up in an intense ritualistic way, but in Taurus, in an embodied way. In terms of that feminine too, there's something, I get the sense of a feminine vibe that maybe the Stoa needs to harmonize and balance out. That's what this Libra is telling us. So that's a really interesting way of looking at, the Stoa's, a third time around the sun. There could be some interesting challenges to the authority of the Stoa. It's midheaven, getting the opposition from that very challenging Pluto. But I think, that just goes with the territory of being a publicly facing entity. And you're no stranger to the controversy. So I'm sure you'll handle it with aplomb, but it could be something, there could be a tension you may feel between the public face of the Stoa and what its really mandate and mission is. Because there's some squaring aspects going on that could be challenging in a way, but that's sort of just a snapshot of what could be possible in 2022 for the Stoa.
Yeah. I can share some stuff that resonated and see if it maps over the building relationship stuff. It seems like, the Beyond Self-Discipline experience that we're officially launching on April 1st. You took the prototype in October, and we're launching it in April, and we're launching it on April Fool's Day. So there's perhaps there's a reason for that. But yeah, it's a thing.
It's the new moon in Aries, April Fool's Day. So it's the perfect day to launch it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's oriented towards wisdom, this thing, and the idea is to build. We're only letting 12 people in this time, unlike 50, and so it's about building kind of deeper connections. And the whole experience is about designing, like how we're doing it this time is like week 1 is going to be a full week of just designing your ecology of practice, and then week 2 is just living it out. We're going to call it Heaven Week, and then being kept accountable. And like Daniel and I were like, wow, it's actually like designing an ecology of practice it takes a lot of work to get like all the pieces right. And like, it's not some straightforward thing that people have figured out, especially if it's oriented towards something nebulous like wisdom or perhaps being less foolish. And so, yeah, that nuts and bolts thing that you mentioned about just taking the practices, concretizing them, and then like just living them out instead of a bunch of talking heads on the Stoa. And yeah, so that's cool, and that resonates. And the Libra rising, the feminine energy. It's funny, the logo, like, so I updated the video, the intro, which you saw, and then we're updating. I got an illustrator to do the logo. So like instead of Marcus with sunglasses, it's gonna be Marcus embracing a woman. And then so it's sort of like that's going to be the new logo, and it feels like that is the movement that personally I'm going through, like just getting a right relationship with these primordial energies of the feminine, masculine within. And there's a lot of embodiment work that I've been doing. And if you want to map the word feminine to that stuff, it feels right to me. And so, yeah, I feel like there's going to be not necessarily a feminization of the Stoa, but just infusing that energy in hopefully a sophisticated way with that kind of the more masculine kind of thumos stuff. And I like the idea of the playfulness. Yeah, one thing, I have so much fucking ideas that are just bubbling up, and I don't know if they're going to all be enacted with next year, but they're ideas that are going to really kind of blur the line potentially of what the Stoa is. It's all not going to happen on the not the fucking YouTube channel, but it's like it's going to be like in conjunction with a lot of everything's happening. So yeah, definitely going to be playful of what even the Stoa is. I sense if some of these ideas get initiated. Yeah, so those are what resonated when you mentioned all that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just the language you used, right? You talk about this beyond self-discipline as being ecologies of practice, sixth house, but you called it heaven week, right? Pisces, right? That's heaven. It's the associated. So it's what I always find fascinating is that you already do what I find when I do consultations with people, they're already doing it, right? It's always kind of aligned in a way. It's just helpful to sometimes just see it sort of illustrated, in this language of these symbols. But when you said that, I was just like, well, of course, ecologies of practice within a heavens context, right? And then the issues of and I know we get tripped up and on masculine and feminine, and it's really difficult to even have that conversation sometimes. But that is really astrology leans into that because it really is part of the very foundation of what all these symbols are. And we think of it in terms of yin and yang, right? These classic symbols of one is an outward moving force, another is an inward moving force, but we all have them. Right, we all have an admixture of these qualities. We all have planets in these earth or water signs, which are yin, they're feminine. It's downward. When we talk about embodiment, we're talking about yin. We're coming in. We're coming into our bodies. We're coming into our ensoulment versus that yang, which is the fire of spirituality or the mental, the galaxy brain. That's good. We need that, but we need both. You need the yin and the yang. And so, yeah, I really think this Libra theme for the Stoa 2022 would be really appropriate to the unfoldment. If we are going to use this as a guide, that's what the energy is calling us to embody and to embrace and to engage, is this more flowing dynamic exchange between those two energies, because that's what Libra is trying to do, is balance out, is harmonize the yin and the yang. So kudos to you. And I'm excited to see what unfolds, and may this be a new tradition. And then a year from now, we'll look back and we can see what unfolded and sort of, make this a ritual unto itself. I would love that.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah, I imagine I have some more kind of like questions or shares, but perhaps it's best to let it sit now. And yeah, man, thanks so much for doing this and doing what you do in general, but it's offering this gift for the Stoa. Is there anything else you think would be good for us to conclude on?
No, I think it's been said. Like you said, let's just let it sit and rest, and I'm just, excited to see what unfolds and just to watch, for me as being someone who's participating and observing and feels very deeply connected to the Stoa. I'm excited for for its continued unfoldment and for its growth, right? It is like this, it's like a newborn. It's a little 2-year-old baby, right? It's full of promise and big and vimmer. And I'm just excited for what is going to happen in the next year. I really do think a lot of these community practices, it's like, I think it's shifting into something much deeper, right? Eighth house, like that that primal energy of that, what the Stoa is. I think that is what it's born to do. It was born of that time to solve, to meet that crisis moment. It's born for crisis. It's born for transformation. So just to watch it continue to unfold, to evolve. That's a key word for Pluto, evolution. That's why it wants to transform things, because it needs to evolve. That's how we grow. That's how we develop. So watching the Stoa evolve and grow is a real pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be a part of it, to know you as a friend of virtue, and to, benefit from all that you've done. And just I guess it's just a big thank you too. I think I speak for everyone. It's like, it's really amazing what you've done with this not fucking YouTube channel. It's so valuable. It's been so helpful to so many people, and it's brought us together in ways that I don't think we could have without it. So, kudos to you, my friend. Thank you.
Appreciate the share and gratitude, my friend. It's well received. And yeah, the Born for Crisis. I think that's like a birth of a motto, I think, for the Stoa. It's pretty dope. I like it. Yeah, and there's more that I can share, but we scheduled only for 45 minutes. But yes, on the video notes, I'll put your information. So if anyone wants to check out your stuff, anything you want to mention there, if they're looking to do some work with you, in case they have a crazy project that they want a birth chart for,
or sure.
Chart.
Yeah, I would love to do it. Yeah, you can just go to my website, astrolab21.com, and reach out to me there. Set up a session. I'd love to do it for anyone who's interested, or other members of the community. Yeah, this is the gift that I give. This is my daimon has brought me to this. It's my passion. It's my joy. So yeah, I'd be happy to share and help out with anyone who's interested.
Love it. All right, brother. Thanks again, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, bro.